I was diagnosed with breast cancer in November of '08, and when I was diagnosed, I had the kind of typical, what I refer to as the Western medical sort of system response to it, which is that they scare you to death and they tell you that you must schedule yourself for surgery and radiation immediately. And in fact, after having had the kind of cliche response where I cried and did all that, I remembered that I'd read a lot about alternative medicine and the success it was happening, that people were having with that and cancer. And I just thought, I don't need to do this. I'm going to figure out something else. And I had no idea what it was going to be, but I said that to the doctor. I said, no, let's not schedule me for anything. I'm going to do this differently. And she looked at me and she said, then you will die. And I sort of laughed and I said, you're right, I will, but it won't be from this. And I was always, from the beginning, much more interested in trying to figure out the whole body, and because cancer doesn't come from nowhere, and unless you figure out what's causing it and what's throwing the body off, it's going to come back, which is what happens to a lot of people. And so I came back to the U.S. and within weeks, just happened to have a phone conversation with Stanley Tucci, who was my old business partner, and he and his wife had been dealing with her breast cancer, and they told me about Sergei, something about his personality that is incredibly healing, and he really seemed to understand everything, and he could explain things to me in a way that made sense, and I just decided that this is what I was going to do. And my treatment really varied. There were times where I went twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. There were small periods of time where I went every day. And then I would go, then all of a sudden I would stop and maybe go every other week, or because the way he works is that he reads your body on any given day and determines when he needs to see you next. And what's also interesting is it's not just the energetic corrector. He has these hands that are amazing, and he can find points in your body that sort of release, where he can release energy and allow the machine to do its work more effectively. And you also drink the alkaline and acid waters, which he sort of prescribes, and that too helps the whole process of ultimately bringing your body back into homeostasis, which is the whole concept, and so that your body then rejects the cancer on its own, which is an idea that appeals to me very much. And by my timing, within a couple of months, the cancer was gone from my lymph nodes, and that was the sort of biggest surprise, because that was obviously the more frightening area, because everything that was in my breast was, pretty much DCIS. I mean, there was some invasive cancer there, but it was mostly contained. But the lymph node is obviously where it potentially spreads, and to have it out of my lymph node was very exciting.
Talk a little bit about how it affected maybe other parts of your life and not just your cancer.
I would say that the treatment from the corrector also gives you lots of energy, makes you feel great. I've had digestion issues off and on, and that has completely helped with that. I mean, that plus the waters, they're a big part of it. And another very important part of the Sergei protocol is to do everything he says, because a lot of his treatment involves things like compresses or enemas, or even just spraying water sometime on your body and letting it dry. And it's really important to do those things. Some of them sound so simple you can't imagine that it's going to make a difference, but it really does. And if you don't do it, you don't get the same kind of results. And I know it's a frustration for him. He'll say too many patients just don't do the things that they're asked to do. And that's an incredibly important part of it.
How were you able to live your life and function? To what extent was it invasive at all to do this treatment?
Well, to a certain degree it certainly is, because even when I wasn't getting treatment every day, I was going to pick up water all the time. So I was making a big trip every day. It didn't ever bother me because it was to get rid of cancer.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess as far as your work was concerned, you were able to work still, or were you?
Oh, I mean, I felt great. I mean, I could do whatever else I was doing. It was a time commitment more than anything. But there should be.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, if you're trying to deal with something as important in this, that seemed to be a very fair trade-off.
When was the last time that you went in to go see a conventional doctor, and what did that doctor say, and what was your reaction to that?
Okay, I haven't seen a conventional doctor in a year, an oncologist. It was an oncological surgeon. I haven't seen her in a year. And I stopped going just because it was pointless, because we kept having the same conversations, which is they kept saying, when do you want to have surgery? And I would say, I'm not planning to at this point. And at that point, she actually did an ultrasound, and that's the first time that she saw that it was gone from my lymph nodes, and it was fascinating because she did not want to admit it. And she just kept looking and looking, and I kept saying, it's gone, isn't it? And she would say things like, well, it appears that way. I mean, she would just say, yes, it's gone.
Was that the same doctor who told you that you were going to die if you didn't?
No, that was a different one.
Okay.
But more recently, I actually had an encounter socially with a man who is, I refer to him as Mr. Cancer, because he was this big muckety-muck in the cancer world. He's subsequently retired, and he and I really got into it. And when I was describing what had happened to me, his only explanation for the fact that it was no longer in my lymph nodes was that he said, well, are you sure you actually had cancer? And he said, was it actually biopsied? And I said, yeah, twice, once in the lymph and once in the breast by 2 different people. So granted, Western Med makes a lot of mistakes, but that's a lot of mistakes if you think that. But that was the only way he could wrap his head around the fact that it was gone.
Yeah, so they just can't get it. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of because it's a whole approach, and the part of Western medicine that I think is disjointed is that they look at one thing and then the other as if they're unrelated.
Well, symptoms basically, rather than anything that's underlying. And
like one thing may be causing it all.
Well, and the fact that, it's hardly a big surprise that we all have cancer at different times in our lives. And most of the time it's resolved naturally. And if they can even acknowledge that on some level, why can't they acknowledge that sometimes, if your body's working properly, it can rid itself of it?
Definitely.
Even when it's more advanced. I mean, it's just, part of it is also corruption, frankly. But,
yeah, well, the industry behind it.
Yeah.
And I guess, I really wanted to get this point across, and that's when you were diagnosed for the first time in your life with cancer, how, what did they tell you? They told you that you have to go on this conventional route or else, you were going to die. But I want to know, how you felt when you, I guess, first, got that news, was it, I guess, what your attitude was and what your outlook was and your dedication, to really commit yourself to,
Yeah, I mean, initially I responded the way absolutely everybody else in the universe does, that I know, which is that I, fell apart, dissolved in tears, I said, oh my God, I have a 2-year-old daughter, this can't be happening. And you see your life flashing before you. I mean, it's horrible. And unfortunately, the way our medical system is set up, they feed that. They don't do anything to support you and make you think it's possible. They feed the fear, basically. And I was just lucky in that I happened to have been interested in health and nutrition and various things like that, so I had just been reading about it for some time. And I knew, having done that, I just knew of people who, I knew stories about people curing themselves of cancer alternatively. And it took me probably a half an hour to kind of dig deep inside and remember that. And once I did, it was very easy to kind of shift my resolve. But I really feel lucky because I understand what a struggle it is for people to do anything other than what the doctors are telling them. I mean, we still live in a world where people have way too much faith in doctors and think they really know everything, and they just don't. And I think people need to listen to themselves much more than they do, and their own instincts. And I mean, what I really believe about the whole cancer thing is that there are a lot of different ways of ridding one's body of cancer, and I think you have to listen to yourself about what is the right path for you and not be cowed by the fear that is just tossed on top of you constantly. And it's very hard. But seeing someone like Sergei makes it a lot easier because he's very confident of what he's able to do.
And to the extent that he's dealt with, other people with accelerated forms of a variety of illnesses, there's something, I think, in his healing that is kind of like a more universal understanding and